And I am your host this morning. My name is Michael James, and we are having a pretty good time up here. It's a musical morning in the Heartland, and I've got to say now, one of my favorite people in and about town, maybe in the world, is here with me, and that's Dave Laser. Good morning to you, Dave.
Morning, Michael.
You got to get close to this microphone.
Morning,
you
Michael.
Dave, right on there, brother. He was a little surprised I called him one of my favorite people, but I always have liked this guy from the time he actually, in the early days of the Heartland, was hanging around and working on his bicycle back in the shop a lot. I think he was probably on the clock, too, while he was doing that.
Probably.
Was my kind of guy in those days. So, Dave, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where do you come from, and how did you end up in Chicago, and what led you to the world of Chicago performance and folk music and those kind of things?
And folk music. I grew up on a farm in Michigan.
A 4-H club guy?
No.
Okay.
No, I already knew that wasn't going to be my future. So I grew up on the farm, and as soon as I was old enough to leave home, I got the heck out of Michigan and moved to Chicago, because that was like the cool place to be, right?
It still is.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's still the cool place to be. I was infatuated with music. That was like the source of culture for me, living on the farm. There wasn't much else. So I had a lot of music, and from all different directions. Motown, country music, pop music. So it seemed like a source of fulfillment. And Chicago was the closest place that I knew of where a lot of that stuff was happening, where you could actually go and be a writer and be involved in music and make something happen. So I headed for Chicago as soon as I could leave home.
How old were you when you first started playing the guitar?
I was 12.
That's a good age to start.
Yeah. My parents bought one that was hanging over a bar in my little town there.
Can you tell us the name of your town?
Durand is the name of the town.
Durand, Michigan.
Yeah. It's in the Rust Belt, about halfway between Flint and Lansing.
And so you came to Chicago. You remember the year?
1974.
And what was that?
Exactly.
So you were pretty new to Chicago when I first met you, because I met you around 76.
Yeah.
And what was your first job in Chicago?
I worked at the electromotive plant, building locomotives.
That ended up being a UAW plant, as I recall, United Auto Workers.
Oh, it was when I went there. It was.
Were you in a union?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I always had a job.
If you'd stuck with that union, you'd be owning part of Chrysler
I'd be
today.
retired now.
You'd be a big owner now.
I'd be retired now. I'd own my own locomotive.
And so, tell me about those early years in Chicago. Who did you run into? Where did you go? What kind of music did you hear? There's a fellow putting together a book on Chicago history, and so I've been looking at a lot of old pictures, and I bet you'd be a guy who would have some resources for what it was like back then. Tell us what you remember.
Well, it was really exciting in the middle 70s, because the Chicago folk scene was peaking around that time. So, and it was very egalitarian, so you could hang out with anybody and everybody. I got to hang out with Stevie Goodman and John Prine and some of the guys from the generation in front of us were still around. Like Bob Gibson and Hamid Camp and those guys. So it was, you could hang out, be out on any night, and run into some really interesting people and playing at some of the clubs like the Earl of Old Town and Somebody Else's Troubles. The Earl was great because you got to meet all the people that would come across the street from the comedy club across the street would come across for the late shows. So, that was always, you could meet like Jim Belushi and John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd hanging out in the back room at the Earl of Old Town.
When did you first run into our pal Tom Dundee?
I met Tom in 1975, and I was actually hanging out with Mike Jordan, who was another.
Who's a good buddy of Tom's.
Yeah, good buddy of Tom's and of mine at the time, and Mike and I, Mike came to pick me up one night to go out and just kind of hang out, and Tom was with him. So I met Tom then, and I was being sort of raucous that night, and Mike.
Well, that's three raucous guys.
Yeah, three raucous guys. Yeah. Well, Tom at the time was very conservative. He didn't drink, and he was vegetarian and was a pretty well-behaved guy. He told Mike I scared him.
He was when Tom showed up here, he worked in the kitchen for in the early days for a couple of days.
Yeah.
And but there's some pictures of him working on the place and up by a piano on the old stage. Tom Dundee, for anyone who doesn't know, came out of Chicago and he went to school up in Evanston. He went to Catholic high school, St. George, I believe.
Yeah.
And which is no longer around. And it's where the Evanston Hospital is, I think, or the St. Francis Hospital. Mm-hmm. And Tom became quite a player. He was around. He put out a number of albums, and he would tour regularly. And he had a motorcycle accident a couple of years ago, and it was on a Saturday morning or late Friday night. Probably early Saturday morning, and it took a lot of us in the music community, the club community, and just a number of people really by surprise, and it was a pretty sad situation. So one of the things you and I talked about over the last couple of years was just having a Tom Dundee birthday party.
Right.
Not a memorial, just let's come together and let's play some of Tom's music. And you've been inspirational in putting this together. Tell us a little bit about this event that's coming up.
Yeah. The event is about Tom had a gift for making people feel appreciated for all their, foibles and goofiness and wackiness and general humanity.
And everybody thought he was their best friend.
Yeah.
They thought, oh, Tom likes me best.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea for me, anyway, behind having the celebration is to just have everybody get together and appreciate each other in the same way. It's like, just because Tom's gone doesn't mean we can't still appreciate each other for all our wackiness. So.